In this movie, we're going to add the final bit of JavaScript code to display our student information on the screen and to highlight the div that the user has picked. For those of you following along with the exercise files, we're looking at ajax/chapter06/07/script.js. So we need to scroll all the way down to the bottom, and the very last thing that we're going to do here is finish off our feature1div function. That's all we've got left to do. So we start off saying var all divs equals document.get elements by tag name and pass it in div. By now you should be familiar with lines like this. This gives you an array of all the divs on your web page. Now we need to loop through it for var I equals 0, I less than all divs dot length, I++. And what we're going to do here is we need to clear the class name from all the divs. Only one of them has possibly been picked in the previous time we've come here, but just in case one of them has, we don't know which one, so we're just going to clear out all of them. So we say all divs sub I dot class name equals nothing. And that's the first part of our function. Next up, we need to grab the div that they clicked on. We do that by creating a new variable called the div, which can be a couple of different things depending on whether or not an event object exists at this point. If it does, then we want to grab event.target. Otherwise, we're going to set the div to window.event.sourceElement. And this is the div that they clicked on. That this line is set up in such a fashion so that it works in a number of different browsers. But it gives you the target of the div that was clicked. Now that we have that, we know which div was clicked on. We want to set this div dot class name to picked div. Now, if you recall back in the CSS file, we said any div with the class name of picked div would show up red and opaque. This is where that happens. We also wanted to create a new variable called the student, and we'll start it off initializing it as null. Going to do another loop here. This time for I less than data array.length, because we're going to go looping through all the data that we have. I++. And if the div.id, that's the ID of our div, which is, if you recall, the seat name that we care about. If that ID equals data array sub I, because we're on the ith data array that we're looking at, dot seat. If they match, then we found the student that we're looking for. And in that case, we want to set the student equal to data array sub I. So let's scroll down. Now, in theory, there's a chance that no student may have been found. For instance, you may have an empty seat in the classroom. So let's start off by checking to see if the student exists. Because we set it to null when we first declared it and initialized it, if it wasn't reset here, it won't pass this test. If there's no student, then we don't want anything to happen, everything's fine. But if there is a student, we want to create a new variable called studentInfo. And it's going to be set to document.get element by ID detail. That's a little detail div that's going to contain all little pop-up windows with the student information based on where they clicked. So it's studentInfo is what we're going to be filling in. Now we're going to add another variable that's called the message. And it's going to contain the actual code that we want in this div. Span ID equals, here's our close box that we're adding. All it is the letter X inside a span, and then we add and h3. Now this is the first of several lines that are going to be used to set up the message. So now we say the message plus equals. That concatenates on to the same string. So we say the message plus equals the student dot first name plus space plus the student dot last name. And once again, more stuff will be added on to the same string. But now we want to end that h3, and then we want the seat number. So we seat colon space plus the student dot seat. And once again, we want to put this on a new line, so we stick in a break and then say lunch period colon space plus the student dot lunch period. And finally, message equals, here's another break, and the student is in reading group, and it's the student dot reading group. So that's where we set up the message. Now we need to do something with that message. So that goes into studentinfo.inner HTML is set to the message. And that's going to put all of that into the HTML of this little pop-up. But now we need to tell the little pop-up where it needs to go. So that goes into studentinfo.style.top is equal to the div.offset top, which is where the div itself is. We set the top to be based on the div.offset top. That's where the top of the div is. Now we're going to subtract 5 from that because we don't want it to be level with the div. We actually want it to be up a little bit. So we're going to do it over to the right and up just a little bit from the div that they selected. So as the top is smaller, it goes up. And then we concatenate px on, so that way we have a number and then end with px, and that's the number of pixels from the top. Next we need to say where we want it in terms of its left. So here's studentinfo.style.left, the div.offset left, and we're going to add 35 because that's going to push it over a bit to the right because it's that many pixels over from the left-hand side. And finally, we set studentinfo.style.visibility to make this actually show up on the screen equal to visible. Because if you recall, the CSS said it should be hidden. And the very last thing we do is we set document.getElementById close box dot onClick equal to an anonymous function. And what that anonymous function is going to do is go for document.getElementById detail dot style dot visibility equals hidden. So in order to close this little detail information windowlet, we click on the close box, and that tells it to be hidden again. Now let's scroll all the way down to the end. All our close braces line up, and that should be the end of our JavaScript. In the next movie, we'll test this all and see how well it works.